Margaret, over to you.
Hi, good afternoon. Sorry, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks once again for joining us. This is our third Thursday afternoon coffee break, and this is to coincide with Black History Month, as well as the launch of the Ethnicity Awards. So once again, thank you everyone that's put in a submission, and of course, congratulations to all those that have been shortlisted. If you need to know or want to know any more about the awards, please drop me a line. I can get back to you on that. We also, if anyone's interested in to find out how to complete next year's maturity matrix, please let me know. We also, at the moment, we're concentrating on allyship and an ally advocate program, which is going extremely well. Anything you need to know about investing in ethnicity, please drop me a line and I'll get back to you ASAP. So we're going to kick off tonight or this afternoon session. It's the authentic, inclusive and success allies. We've got 3 panelists that are absolutely amazing. They've all been shortlisted. So I'm going to hand you back to Sarah, who will continue. Thanks, Sarah.
Hi, and thank you all for joining us today. We're also on Facebook Live, and we will be recording the session if you want to share it with colleagues and friends after this. We're lucky enough to be joined today, and this session is around allyship. So it's part of our Ethnicity Awards, and we've announced the top 100. You can find out the whole list at ethnicityAwards.com. But this session today, and we've got one every week, is around our top 10 allies and champions. And we're lucky enough to be joined by Galvin from Macquarie, Louise, Ebrey from Network Rail, and Colette Comerford from Legal and General Investment Management. I'd like to just introduce our speakers today. So Ryan, if you'd like to just introduce yourself and maybe just tell us a bit about your background as an ally.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for that, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so Ryan Galvin, I work for Macquarie Group in London. My background as an ally really started with purpose, I guess, when I joined Macquarie 3.5 years ago, where I wanted to learn more about the company, about the people I worked with. And there were certain things that I identified, sporting related to things that weren't happening, and opportunities for staff to come together and not necessarily obstructing certain groups or minorities of people in those events, and looking very much at being very inclusive. And I think some of the examples I'll give in today's session will kind of talk to some of that, to some of those events. So that's me.
Fantastic. And Louise, can you tell us a bit of background about yourself, just a quick sort of background about that, and also this year as well, because this year's been a rather tough year. So how's it been for you?
Yeah, so I'm Louise Ebrey. I work for Network Rail in the sort of change and improvement function, and I guess my journey into allyship has come as a progression from that change and improvement function, and it really came into being able to provide opportunities to hold conversations that we'd not had before, and provide mentoring and provide different spaces to have conversations, both through mentoring some BME colleagues, and also through supporting the white ally community.
Fantastic.
And this year, sorry, you asked about this year, it's been bonkers, hasn't it? But again, that's opened up all sorts of different conversations about how we do things differently, and how we don't go back to where we were before, whether that's in terms of working from home. It's just providing different ways to do things, and I think that opens up opportunity to all sorts of people.
Yeah, I love that positivity. It's like, with change, there are opportunities. It's trying to find cherry pick what those are and how we can best utilize them. And we're going to talk more about that later on as well. And Colette's not just on our champions list, but also Legal and General, part of our Legal and General Investment management are part of our top 10 employers as well. So it'd be really good to hear from you around what employers can do as well. So how's it been this year? Has it been full on around a lot of change, and how have you managed to implement inclusion still around that? Colette.
Yeah, I guess well, my day job is head of. Oh, sorry if there's some background noise there. Yeah, so sorry, my day job is head of inclusion and culture. So yeah, part of my role is really to drive our initiatives around diversity and inclusion, and really think about that continuous improvement. So yeah, part of my work, the benchmarking index has been really useful. Actually, this was the first year we submitted it, but as part of our membership last year, we were looking at the benchmarking index to think about how we were setting some of our objectives around race and ethnicity, how we were working with our network group as well when they were setting objectives, and really the role of leadership in sort of taking a leadership role on the agenda as well. So submitting it this year and obviously getting into the top 10 was such one. I think it came as a relief actually as well when we found out, because the few months from June time was really challenging, particularly around race and ethnicity. But actually it sort of really sort of gave us a sense that some of the work we'd done was starting to really make a difference, really setting a good foundation for what we want to do going forward. So yeah, really excited to be here today and chat to you more about that as well.
Fantastic. And we have a quick poll for everyone. I know it's 4 o'clock and it but we are also encouraging you to use the chat function as well. And we've seen in a lot of our sessions that this is a confidential space. So it's a good opportunity to sort of ask questions as well. There will be a Q&A at the end. But also, if you want to share any sort of insights you have as well to other participants, that's great. But what I wanted to do first is just launch a poll around whether you think Black Lives Matter and this period of time has actually helped get allies on board or not. And I'm going to launch that now. And this is just a quick poll. And we're going to ask our panelists what they think as well. And do feel free to add into chat. So you should be able to see the poll now. And if we're just going to give you a couple of seconds to just start. We've got people starting to vote now. I do love this poll thing. So I can see that at the moment, obviously, we're getting quite a lot of people voting yes and a few maybes. And it'd be really useful for those people who have said maybe to sort of put in the chat why they think that is. I'm just going to give it a couple more seconds. Okay, we're in the poll. So we've got 90% people who say yes, and maybe we have 10%. So if you can add in why, and we've already got a couple of people in chat as well. Margaret, can you read out some of the comments on chat before we go?
There's that one. It said it might raise it into their conscious, but do they become genuine allies? That's the question.
That's quite a good response. And just back to this, to our speakers. If we start with Louise, you've touched on it already, so it might be good to start with you. This year has been crazy, and there has been opportunities. But do you think? How do you find? If we have got or you're finding there is more of a captive audience there, how are you?
So I think it's enabled people to have more open conversations. I think it's opened the eyes of people a little bit more, and a lot of people are still on that journey to, oh, what does that mean? Now I've found this thing out that I didn't know about before. So they may not yet know what they need to do or have made a real conscious decision, but I think there's a lot of people started that journey. And we've also had 25% increase in membership in our Cultural Fusion, which is our diversity network. And some of that is allies and some of that is is our main colleagues. So that it's definitely starting to show, but I don't quite know where it's going yet.
Beginning of that journey. And Ryan, how are you seeing the change in, you know, if you compare sort of last year to events that have happened this year?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even from my own personal experiences and what I've been engaged in, I've definitely seen an increase in the number of events this year from our Fusion employee network group, especially around things around anti-racism events, allyship workshops, can't even get my words out, that have been run certainly more frequently. They're definitely more prominent, and I think we've definitely got a captive audience within our company where people are showing that willingness to want to learn more and engage, as Louise said, in those kind of conversations. And I definitely think there's a lot, there is an attitude in people at the minute where they want to learn more about how they can tackle structural racism as well. So I think we're definitely on that journey, but I kind of agree with what Louise has said as well.
Yeah, it does appear like there's it's a continuous learning journey, isn't it? And it's a long one of building up. At least there's a captive audience, but it's the awareness piece and then educational side of it. Colette, what has legal in general been doing sort of on that front of, like, you know, obviously we've all sort of seeing that there is a captive audience, but what sort of things as an organisation can we do to sort of harness that and encourage and engage more allies?
Yeah, I guess focus on the three things that we did since June time. And I think June time in particular, we have an office in Chicago, an office in the UK. And so actually in Chicago, a lot of our people were affected when they went out to march and support, obviously, change on race, ethnicity. And actually some of them were deeply affected by, by the riots that actually triggered afterwards. And actually the same then in London, people were speaking up. So I guess there was two things that sort of happened in the first stage of that. Some people were stepping up saying, I want to help and want to do more. I just don't know what I want to do. That allyship stepped out. And then on the other side, actually, some of our people were deeply impacted, right? Because actually, if you've been through life, younger, sort of going through education and society, and you're experiencing these microaggressions, maybe racism in society, actually you're affected emotionally as well. So we're trying to sort of work through, how do you support those that may be struggling, and actually how do you support the allies who are saying, I want to do something, I just don't know what to do, right? So actually, I guess the first step for us was we really started with some of the the executive committee got involved in reverse mentoring circles to listen to the experience of our people, really about understanding what more we can do to drive positive change. I guess the next stage was really the allyship bit, when we worked with investing in ethnicity, really around the allyship toolkit, and our people wanted to help others, obviously, on that journey of saying, what can we do to make a difference? So we got involved in that, and obviously involved in the rollout in August, September, which was a very strange time, thinking that was a type of session you'd be running at the end of August when a typically holiday period. And I guess where we are now, our network have adapted as well into a virtual world of how do we share more speaking opportunities, talking opportunities to our people. So in the last 4 weeks, it's been really interesting, where the first part of Inclusion Week, one session focused on the family network and the race and ethnicity network came together to bring a speaker in to say, how do we talk to young people about race, ethnicity? Understanding that actually when you're at home, you are also potentially, your language could be what is actually, I guess your young people develop language maybe from parents, etc., or maybe parents don't know how to talk to young people about race, ethnicity, things are happening in school environment. And then we've also had sessions that talk predominantly, specifically to Black culture. We've had this week a Black African, Black Caribbean sort of cultural discussion, so people understand heritage and people's backgrounds, and these are all stories told by our own people. And then we've had a Southeast Asian, South Asian sort of cultural differences. So it's been really encouraging to see how our own people have now started to really educate, talk about their own experiences, but in a really positive way that's about how we celebrate in culture and how we celebrate in our people and those differences in a really positive way, I think, for the business. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a sense of the sort of 3 areas that we focused on over the last months, really.
It sounds like there's a whole raft of sort of things people can dip in and out of. I've heard as well, like, so network groups have been doing a lot to support what's been happening at the moment, and then maybe to their detriment and fatigue. I don't know if, Louise, you found that, you know, your network group has been, obviously there's been a lot of activities. Is there a lot of support for network groups, and obviously allies wanting to learn something naturally sort of gravitated towards them? Have you found that?
I think sometimes people don't know where to go, so there's still some talking and getting us to get the allies to know that they can also be part of the network group if you're not part of the demographic of that particular network group, knowing that it's also for you. I think I've been guilty of that in the past, gone, oh, I'm not in that category, I won't join that network group. And we've got more network groups than I could be active in all of them anyway.
Have you found that there's an increase in?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to know what you're right. Yeah, increase of membership of allies and across the board in the demographic, and a real increase in people wanting to talk about things, the engagement, the difficult conversations, a lot of conversations that are much more difficult to hear than or people feel safer to have those more difficult conversations, and that talking to people in the cultural fusion group in the run up to this, that's what they were saying, but that takes a lot of time. So they've been really grateful for the allies that some of our allies have been doing the background work, the membership, the writing articles, so that the long-standing cultural fusion colleagues can be having those difficult conversations where they need to.
Fantastic. Margaret, I can see, like, keep the comments coming because there's some really great comments.
Yeah, there's one that says, how do you change an organisation that has institutionalised racism?
So when we look at the more broader level, we are going to go on to some tips as well, and looking at, as an individual, how you can improve allyship. But just a quick question from, like, the chat: how can we drive it? Does anyone want to take that? How can we drive it when there's a lot of policies and stuff that need to change as well? I would say do the maturity matrix and sort of get rid of all that institutionalized racism stuff. But anyone want to say about their organisation? Colette?
Yeah, I'm happy to take part of this, and I think, look, it's about firstly it's about accountability, right? In terms of, you know, firm-wide accountability to address change, positive change, and I think that starts from the leadership level. So from our perspective, for example, our executive committee have got, as part of their objectives, 10% of their objectives about culture and diversity outcomes. But actually earlier this year, as part of 2020, we made sure that filtered down through the business. So all people leaders have the same objective. And actually everybody, then we said, well, look, actually everyone should have an objective for diversity and inclusion to drive that. So we need to continue, obviously, strengthening that as well. So look, the mechanisms that you really need to ensure that that's happening is a couple of things. Firstly, the data. We have an action to really close the gap, particularly on our race, ethnicity data. So then you sort of start to overlay that across things like, you know, recruitment. How are people coming into your application pool and getting through the system and actually being hired? And pay is really, really key. So we do equal pay reviews every year. So that's before I think you even get to pay gap, which is quite blunt. I think it's important that somebody doing the same role is actually getting paid fairly as well. So the gap in data obviously is critical to fill, to make sure that covers 100%. Performance reviews, we're coming into performance review period now. So actually this whole movement and using the benchmarking index has basically enabled us to say to our people, we need to close this, so that ahead of performance reviews, we're able to also monitor the outcomes of those, particularly for those in underrepresented groups, and make sure they're being assessed fairly. And of course, that starts to lead to pay, right, again, and it starts to lead to promotions. So it's really important that you sort of have mechanisms that actually as a leadership team have an accountability. You see what's working well and you see what's not working. Because as they go down the layers to managers in their areas, they need to pick up quite quickly about, firstly, the engagements or employee engagement scores, you know, what's good in there, but actually the outcomes of decisions that they're responsible for and making every day are actually being addressed. So I guess,
just to interrupt,
it would
just say, like, obviously we all point about being at the top. So I could come from the opinion that everyone should be an ally. So, but starting at the top and role modeling that behavior is really important. Sorry to interrupt you, but then you get to influence that sort of change. But also as individuals, it's what tips, so people who are listening today, what tips can we give? And I wanted to go over to Ryan because I wanted to hear your story. It was really amazing, like your story of how you within Macquarie sort of came, you probably didn't even realize it was part of allyship when you sort of encountered that, but how you organically started doing it slightly differently. And just to hear that story, and then sorry to interrupt you, Colette, but then we'll go back to sort of some of the tips that people can know. Sorry, Ryan.
Hi, no, good. Just taking myself off mute. Yeah, I agree. I think, as I said earlier on in my intro, like 3.5 years ago, when I kind of set off on the journey, dare I say with intent, I think with some of that came the fact that I didn't actually know what I was doing. You know, my passion was to meet new people, to do that in a way which was inclusive and allowed other people to meet new people. It wasn't all about me or a specific demographic or a specific objective. I just wanted to try and learn about the company and learn about people, and kind of 2 or 3 things that we were focusing on was around inclusivity, around fitness and well-being, and that was kind of my objective. I didn't really have any parameters to be working to. I wasn't kind of aligning myself to being an ally for the BAME community, etc. I really kind of just had those very personal objectives, and I think organically as my involvement grew and I aligned myself with the Delalia Rugby Works charity, and got sponsorship from the organisation and momentum from a number of the ENGs, it became something that it is today, which obviously is something that, you know, includes everyone in our Macquarie London office, and obviously is a benefit. And there are so many testimonies. Individuals have come to me and said, you know, I've made so many good relationships I would have never had the opportunity to meet. And the diversity of those relationships, not just by business, but by ethnicity, I think is really important. And had I not set off on that journey 3.5 years ago, you know, we might not have been where we are today. And I think that culture of positive change helps where we are today with the conversation.
Mm-hmm. I think what's interesting is we've heard from Colette, like around how like you can influence change in a sort of more on the institutional sort of level and the more macro level. And Ryan, you've like sort of done it from a different perspective. Louise, how is sort of your story around allyship and sort of influence and change within the
So my story has been about mentoring and about creating those spaces for the conversations. So I got involved this year in a mentoring circles piece of work where a number of different organisations came together, and so the people, and I've been mentoring non-network rail people. So bringing together those groups of people that are they're from different companies, and they suddenly realizes their experiences are all together. I've just seen something come up in the comments. I was just going to say that I saw my name come up earlier, and I'm on my phone, so I can't answer in comments. The top of that one just said mentoring is only one piece of the puzzle. It is, but the piece of the puzzle where I'm quite good at is about helping people take take obstacles away, identify those obstacles, and ask for help from other people to get rid of them. So that my space is about very personal interactions. I don't tend to work in that big space that Claire works in, which is amazing, but not where I am. I tend to work very much on personal relationships and small groups, and slowly, I said Claire, I meant Colette, sorry, and moving everything from an underneath place.
Great. And Margaret, are there any more comments on the chat that?
Yeah, Louisa just answered one, and there's no more in chat at the moment, so there's no questions to ask anyone. I think everyone's just enjoying the conversation.
I think there's some really good. I've seen one on white fragility and how do we tackle that as well. Just as more of a comment around that, and we do find like allyship within this topic area. We were saying this earlier, how it's a lot different from maybe being an ally within LGBT or being an ally within gender. There's a sort of added layer of maybe trepidation. I just wanted to go into some practical tips, and on chat as well, if you can add in any tips of how you think people should start their allyship journey. But maybe start thinking about some practical tips and things that you can do as an individual within an organisation to sort of help this agenda or help inclusion on the wider scale. Has anyone got any sort of things that come to mind on practical areas? Colette, I'm going to go to you first.
I would say, identify decision makers, right? Allies who are decision makers. And I say that because my starting point as, I'd say, an ally for race and ethnicity was actually my previous role, not D&I, it was as a resourcing manager, and I wanted to affect change in resourcing pipeline. And so it was about doing bias, etc. So I think sometimes when you're an ally, you also want to encourage people who are in decision-making roles in the organization who can affect change. So identify those strengths as a decision maker and then say, actually, sometimes that's your privilege, right? It's the things that you can do that either open a door, you're a voice for someone else in a room, you give that person a seat around the table, and you give that person a voice when they actually need it as well. But I think if you're a decision maker on something, you can affect change, so go for that, really.
Yeah, definitely on that level. And just on a sort of, obviously everyone talks about line managers and stuff, and that sort of frozen middle, and what do you think people within different areas of the organization can do, say if you're not in a senior position of power and you can influence change? What other areas do you think might, people can start tomorrow and change culture within the workplace? Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk from that perspective because I'm not in a position of seniority, and that's kind of what I've tried to do at Macquarie, and I've been supported throughout. For me, one of my priorities has really been to give my colleagues opportunities to learn more about the BAME community, and equally for people within the BAME community to learn about the workplace and financial services, because we have that ability to provide that insight. And one of the things that I focused on over the last couple of years was providing opportunities for young adults from the BAME community that Delalia Rugby Works charity supports, and bringing them actually into Macquarie and giving them an experience of what it's like to work in the workplace. But what that also does is it gives Macquarie staff and those that want to volunteer and actively volunteer and support those events an opportunity to learn a bit more about those communities and those people and their background. So I think it's a win-win from both sides. And that's something that I have done without any authority, without any managerial authority is probably the right way to put it. I've done that through an idea and just wanting to belong on that journey. And I think that the feedback we've had from those children, their teachers, the charity, the organisation has been absolutely positive. It's been fantastic. And actually hearing from my own colleagues that they had a really positive experience and learned a lot about those individuals and what the charity does, I think, is of massive benefit to, again, creating a culture, and a positive one at that.
As someone in the chat, sorry, just said, having BAME role models to mentor other BAME people rather than white people. How do you feel about that? Do you think that it's a bit patronising having white mentors?
So when I was part of this mentoring group, I walked into a room full of 400 people that didn't look like me, and the first thing I thought was, oh my God, what if they don't want me to be their mentor?
Yeah.
And that was a really one of my tips I was going to say to allies is value the experiences you get along the way like that, because that was a huge learning experience for me to be in that reversed position. And yes, I did worry about that, and the person who recommended me to be the mentor had to take me to one side and say, we put you through for a reason, but I have encouraged several people from that group that I mentored to put themselves through as mentors this year, because there are several people in there that have been on that journey. There's a lot that they could do to take that forward. So yeah, it's we do need to get more people in that position where they feel that they can do that.
Yeah,
we're getting some really nice
I think
comments as well on the chat, just about asking. I don't know if everyone's here. I think they're just to the panelists at the moment, but about asking your team members what they want and going that way. Colette, you wanted to say something? So, hi, Colette.
Hello. Yeah, I was just back to the last question. I think you need both mentors who are, from Black, Asian, minority, ethnic groups, etc. And you need, white, I guess, as well, because I guess for us as a firm, for example, the population, the majority is white at the moment as well. And then sometimes I guess part of that is when you have someone who identifies like you as well, it's about the mentoring, maybe opportunities slightly different. Sometimes it's about, you sort of look for things like might be more about confidence building, stepping forward and just not having sometimes, I guess, imposter syndrome, similar things that you might feel is holding you back. Whereas actually someone else might be a mentor for a different reason. They do a particular role. You're trying to navigate the journey, the career path that you want to go on. So you need, I think, mentors. You probably need about a range of 20 of them sometimes, right? So, and you're trying to pull from that mentoring pool just to help you navigate. Yeah.
Exactly. And we're getting some great comments about educate yourself so you can be part of the conversation. And be prepared to get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's a saying I've heard quite a few times. Striving to do better, to be a better ally is not a one and done activity. It's a lifelong journey. So thank you, Matthew, about that. Thank you, Matthew. But we've got lots of comments and keep them coming through. I just wanted to ask if I've sent it on the chat as well. What do we need from allies? So, what would be like the priorities, that we need, like, to actually change an organization? So what are the main things? I know we've touched on this already, but, what are the, if we were going to start that, what would be the first things you could do? Would it be to join a network group, or would it be to just be more inclusive in your, in your behaviors and like sort of address those things like we touched on before? So what would you give as your sort of priority as advice to others? Louise, I'll come to you first.
Sorry, could you just repeat the question again? My brain just froze.
What would you say? It's because it's 4 o'clock. Even my Wi-Fi is going slow at the moment. So yeah. What would you say if as one tip to, if someone could start on their journey tomorrow, what should they do to start that going? Because we talked earlier about how people, I think, asking what to do
something. You can wait to do the whole. It feels like it's a big thing to do, that there's lots to do, and that what you do is could be insignificant, and I just did what I do well in a slightly different place. I didn't go out and try and change the world. I just went and did some stuff, and I'm still slightly bemused that that's significant enough to be on a panel debate like this in some ways, because but if you go out and fix something that you care about, fix something that makes you angry, or do something that you do well in a slightly different environment, it doesn't have to be big. Start with something.
And Colette, what do you think, if what one piece of advice would you give before we go on to write any questions in the question Q&A or in the chat? Margaret will pick them up. But Colette, what's the one thing before we go into the questions that you think, so if people could start tomorrow, that'd be a good starting point?
I think for this agenda, I think firstly I'd say is take away the fear, right? The part you go, I don't know the language, etc. Take that away, just be really brave and just go for it. So I think when I say be really brave, just step back and say, what are my strengths? What can I do to change things and make a difference right now? And literally just use that as your first step, because I think you step forward then really thinking about things I do every day and decisions I make every day that might impact somebody else. And once you do that, I think you start to then step into a space where people will engage with you. You learn the language, you start to make a difference. You do what Ryan pretty much has done as well. You start to connect with other people and start to see that difference is being made because you're sort of building connections, I think. So be really brave, I think, especially on this one.
That's great advice. And what we've heard here, which is really interesting, is really different perspectives and journeys of people using their areas of how they can find a way to actually help drive this agenda from a slightly different angle within their position within an organisation. So it's about maybe thinking and reflecting on that as well, and where you can make a difference as an ally. So we're going over to the Q&A. Are you ready for this, guys?
Correct.
We're going to keep this punchy. So Margaret, I'll hand over to you. She's keeping an eye on the questions.
So there's someone that says, one of my challenges I have in my organisation is having allies understand that as a black person who has to walk into rooms all the time and no one looks like her or him or she, she doesn't understand our allies or how people feel uncomfortable. And she has to deal with it by just performing her day job, and she gets used to it, just deal with it. She's saying that if you're uncomfortable, all you need to do is ask the question. There's no harm in asking. If you don't ask, you don't know. And that I think she's just confused why people are finding this so challenging, when it's just, vain people are not frightening, they're not scary. Just if you don't know something, just ask the question.
So I mentioned earlier as well around white fragility as well, and why do you think that exists? And why do you think, how can we overcome that? I think that's quite good question. And does anyone want to take that? I don't want to
go on.
All right, Ryan, then we'll come back over to Louise.
So I think I can be quite vulnerable and quite honest and say, I probably hadn't done enough in the space and maybe had a learning mindset and kind of taken a proactive approach to understand certain perspectives. And I think, having only recently attended a two-part session where I understand how to become a better ally, and understanding, privilege, what that means to me and others, understanding what microaggressions are. I'll be honest, I didn't actually understand what that term meant until I attended the session, and also the 4 dimensions of racism. I think there are 3 things that have really helped and equipped me with certain tools that I can use.
Ryan, you're really paying attention to that session.
In everyday life. I'm trying my best. But I genuinely feel, as someone who had done things unintentionally with maybe a more selfish purpose, again, if I kind of put myself out there, I think now, having done training, used the tools that are available that the organization has given us, and have that learning mindset and that agenda to want to be more inclusive and understand more about people and their background and everything else, I think for me is fundamental here, and it kind of goes in response to maybe the previous question you asked of both Louise and Colette. I think that is really, is really important in helping to tackle some of this.
To do stuff, but that comes with understanding and educating about.
Yeah.
So there's some really valid points as well in the chat around asking and how we sort of find out that information to build our awareness. Louise, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wondered whether that original comment had come from me saying that it was very unusual when I walked into that room, and feeling that difference. I don't think we get the opportunity when you're in the majority, wherever you are, to feel that difference very often. So we don't know what those experiences feel like. So for me, that was it was only a moment, and it's something that I really value, because when I worked in China for 2 years, but I was an expat. I was in a very privileged position. So even when I was in a room full of people who were very different to me, it was a different kind of scenario. So I don't quite know where I was going, but it was just like that really value when you get the opportunity to experience as an ally something that other people experience all the time. Take what you can from that, because we don't get that.
Fantastic. Well, we've got a couple of more minutes just for some more questions. Actually, we've got a question to Margaret. Margaret's the speaker. This is the first ever question that Margaret's ever had.
If I'm comfortable to answer
it.
I was wondering, someone says, if you're comfortable in answering, what do you think of the response to Black Lives Matter over the past few months? What do I think of the response? It's been very mixed, hasn't it, really? For some people, it's absolutely amazing, and it's brought light to, things that BAME people have to go through on a day-to-day basis, week to week, month to month, year to year. Do you know what I mean? So in that sense, it's really good, because I think what we've seen is this movement is not just in the UK, it's in London, it's in Germany, it's in China, it's worldwide. So for that, I'd say it's amazing. But of course, there's also been some negatives, because people are questioning, the real reasons behind Black Lives Matters. And I think we'll just try and go with the positives, is that it's making people that maybe would not normally have sat up and gone, oh yeah, maybe we're not doing enough, and making them open their eyes and actually trying to do stuff. So I think it's been good, positive, and let's hope it keeps going. The only thing I would say is, I think for the month of October, there's so much going on. Organisations are doing this, doing that. There's everything on TV, and it's great to see, but it would be more, I think for me, longevity if it was over a period. Well, it was just all the time. We saw things with BAME people. We had conversations about race, and people that maybe would normally not get involved, get involved. So for me, a month isn't enough, but it's still good that it's happening.
Fantastic. And also it's about sort of empathy as well, because I don't know, I just wanted to go back to the speakers. Have you found that there's been, it's about listening and having that empathy, and if you're in a position of leadership, leading with compassion, have you found that Black Lives Matter has actually uncovered, some people have realised, there have been actually working within maybe a slightly discriminatory workplace or surrounded by a discriminatory team, which they may not have worked that out before? And how as an ally can you sort of help, or how, even as a human, can you help that situation, or what can you do? And please reply in chat to give any advice as well.
Just a quick one, really. I think a lot of BAME people are thinking that after the month of October, it's all going to die down. A bit like Pride. We do Pride for the month of sort of July, June, July, and then it's sustainable. Yeah, it disappears until the next year. So, what are we going to do? Just going to be different this year. That's going to, once again, longevity. So, as allies, what are you going to do to make this, more sustainable?
Yeah. So two questions there.
Yes.
Yeah, go on, Colette.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to share a couple of things. I think, look, the ally bit has always been quite individual. Well, it is individual in some some sense. Actually, I should think of longevity, like what things have we seen during October that are going to be, last a long time. And I think they, so from our own firm, obviously, as an investor, we've obviously asked, the companies that we invest in to make sure that they've got Black, Asian or another ethnic group representation on their boards by January 2022. And that's following the Parker review. So we're using our position to make sure that that is actually affecting change in long term in those companies. And the CBI came out with the same. So I think that for me is one sort of area we see that's not going to stop at the end of October. That's going to carry on. And I think then just thinking about the date, when I referred to you about the data piece before, look, I talk about data and it's just a measurement. Fundamentally, this is about people. So out of the end of October, we've got to make sure that we're really saying what we're taking action on what we said, i.e. the performance reviews, the outcomes of pay reviews, the outcomes of promotions, etc. And we'll also be heading to Black History Month in the US, obviously in February time. So it definitely won't be stopping from my side. And as an ally myself, that's exactly the priority, that it doesn't stop at the end of October. We carry on.
Brilliant.
And Louise,
I think as well, it's recognize. I wanted to recognise the amount of work that goes into doing a month like that. There's at least a couple of my colleagues that I've seen their names flash up in comments that are on the call, and I know how much work they've been putting into doing this. So there's putting it in a focused way in some ways is good because it really helps get that message out there. But coming after the work that they've been doing, dealing with 25% increase in membership in our network groups, and then we've got this, we need to acknowledge the toll that puts on the colleagues that are doing the day-to-day, running these groups, running the events and everything else, because there's definitely a balance, and I don't know what the right answer
Ryan,
but being aware of the consequences.
Fantastic. Ryan, from your perspective as well, how do we sort of keep this going and the momentum going? That was a really good question.
Yeah, I mean, I take what Louise says, and I think it's true to say that there's a lot of effort that goes into this month. But I think if we can get that culture right in our organisations, from my perspective up and equally from top down, I think it becomes far easier to keep the momentum going, and you don't need to invest as much, dare I say, effort in focusing your attention on a month, because you have that momentum, you build on it, and there's a cultural shift, I think, which helps organizations to keep, the messaging, the positive messaging going. I think that's where the focus really needs to be, is kind of using this as a springboard, not as a one-hit wonder, to try and solve some of these issues.
I think we're all very much on at the start on the journey. So essentially we're all in the same boat, but it was really interesting to hear all your stories, and this is just the start of it. So essentially, it's really different perspectives and stuff. So thank you. And thank you for everyone who joined this conversation as well. We've had some really great comments, and we will have our next session, same time next week, around employees, and looking at more into what you said on some of the chat as well, around the more institutionalized side of it, and how do we challenge those systems within our workplaces. Thank you so much, and thanks to our speakers, because we really rich information there. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah,
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Goodbye.